Portlock, Alaska, is a place cloaked in an eternal shadow, a forsaken land where the echoes of its once thriving community have long since faded. The wind whispers over empty streets, brushing against abandoned homes, and the silence is only broken by the haunting call of distant creatures. Located on the edge of Kachumak Bay, where towering mountains loom in the backdrop, Portlock might have once been a tranquil haven for its residents, but serenity, as often as it does in such places, provided to be a fragile illusion, a cruel mirage that shattered long ago. In the early 1900s, Portlock was a bustling fishing village, a community bound by industry and traditions. The men ventured out into the waters, their boats slicing through the bay as they fished for their livelihoods. The women, resilient and steadfast, tended to their homes, weaving the fabric of everyday life. Children's laughter rang out as they played in the sparse patches of green, their carefree voices filling the air. This was a village with roots that went deep into the land. A village founded by the Kodiak Alutiiq people, whose culture and traditions were woven into the very soil they walked. The land was sacred to them, a place where ancient spirits lingered in the rocks and trees. The Alutiiq people revered the wilderness, honoring it with respect as it had given them life for generations. But as the years passed, something shifted. A subtle change that no one could quite place. A creeping unease settled over the village, like a heavy fog that refused to lift. Whispers began to surface, tales that had been passed down through the Alutiiq elders for centuries. Stories of a creature that lived in the deep waters of Kachumak Bay. A monstrous being with pale, unblinking eyes that watched from the dark depths. This was the Kalupalik, a figure from Alutiiq legend. A warning for children to stay away from the water. But these were the only stories, right? Myths meant to keep the young ones in line. Nothing more, or so the villagers believed. That is, until the disappearances began. It started with a fisherman, a seasoned man who had plied the waters for years without incident. One morning he set out for his usual catch, his boat gliding across the calm bay beneath the clear sky. There was nothing to suggest that this day would be any different from the others. But when the night fell, the fisherman did not return. Days passed and a search party was sent out to find him. His boat was discovered adrift on the water, eerily silent and empty. The villagers, their hearts heavy with unease, began to whisper of the Kalupalik once more. But they pushed the thoughts aside. Surely, there was more logical explanations. Perhaps the man had fallen overboard. Perhaps something else had happened entirely. Something earthly. Then the disappearances escalated. Another fisherman vanished, followed by a woman, then a child. There were no traces, no signs of struggle, just empty spaces where they had once been. But it wasn't just people who were disappearing. The land itself seemed to be changing. The animals, once abundant and thriving, began to act strangely. They grew skittish, their eyes wide with fear, as though they were being hunted by something they could not see, but could feel. Hunters who ventured into the forest returned with strange tales. Tales of figures lurking in the trees, figures that moved with unnatural grace, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. They spoke of tall, gaunt shapes that watched them from the shadows, following their every move without a sound. The Alutiiq elders grew increasingly concerned, speaking of the Non-Tanakh, a shape-shifting creature, a wendigo-like being that roamed the land, feeding on the souls of the lost. Then, one fateful night, the horror reached its peak. A family was found in their home, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. They were torn apart, their flesh shredded in ways that defied all understanding. The sight was so gruesome that even the hardiest of villagers could not bear to look. The brutality of the act sent a wave of terror rippling through the town, but the villagers, in their fear, held their ground, at least for a while. The tension, however, was palpable. It hung in the air like an unspoken truth. They had heard the warnings. Hoia-Baciu had not spoken in vain. And now they knew the price of defying the old ways, of ignoring the ancient beliefs that once governed this land. Soon after the deaths, the whispers in the village grew louder. The shadows in the woods seemed darker, thicker. Something was out there. People who had ventured into the forest spoke of feeling watched, of sensing an unseen presence following them just beyond the trees. It was as if the forest itself had become alive with something malevolent. The animals, once the lifeblood of the land, refused to venture into the deeper parts of the woods, and the people of Portlock began to stay close to their homes, fearing the unseen terror that stalked the village. But that was just the beginning. The final blow came when a fisherman, weary and broken, returned to the village one morning. Not from the water, but from the forest. His eyes were wide and unblinking, his body trembling with an unnatural cold. He stumbled into the village, speaking in disjointed phrases, his words almost incoherent. He had seen something horrible, something monstrous, a creature, part man and part beast, its eyes burning with rage, its body covered in fur. He claimed the creature had whispered his name, called him into the depths of the forest. He had heard its voice in its head, felt its breath on his neck. The man, once strong and sure of himself, now appeared hollow, his mind shattered by what he had encountered. A few days later, he was found dead, his body torn apart, his flesh mangled as though some monstrous force had ripped him apart. His death, like the others before him, went unexplained. An unanswerable question in a town drowning in fear. The deaths, the disappearances, the strange occurrences, and the terrifying stories of creatures lurking in the woods mounted, and one by one, the residents began to flee. They couldn't take it any longer. The terror, the monsters, the oppressive fear that gripped their hearts. Those who remained tried to rebuild, tried to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, but it was futile. The shadows followed them, the creatures stalked them, and the whispers of the Hoia-Baciu people's warnings never ceased. By the late 1950s, Portlock was all but abandoned. The last of its residents packed their belongings and left, never to return. The streets stood empty, the houses left to rot, and nature began to reclaim the land. The spirit of the Hoia-Baciu people had been right. The land was cursed, haunted by forces best left undisturbed. And so, Portlock, once a place of life and laughter, was reduced to a ghost town, a place frozen in time, its secrets buried beneath the earth. To this day, Portlock remains abandoned. Its eerie silence has not gone unnoticed. Locals who dare to venture into the area speak of strange noises, of flickering lights in the distance, and of a suffocating presence that seems to watch them from the shadows. Even the bravest hunters refuse to enter the woods, for they know the stories are true. The spirits of the land are restless, and the creatures that once roamed are still there, lurking in the darkness, waiting. Portlock, Alaska remains a forgotten place, but not by all. The land, untouched and forsaken, still holds its secrets, buried deep beneath the moss-covered trees and the crumbling buildings. And those who are brave or foolish enough to seek the truth may find themselves drawn into the very horrors that drove the village residents to abandon it. The legend of Portlock lives on, a chilling reminder that there are places where the veil between the living and the dead is impossibly thin, where the spirits of the past refuse to fade, and where the shadows of ancient horrors continue to creep, ever hungry, ever waiting. In the heart of Transylvania, there exists a place where shadows seem to move, where the trees stretch their limbs like gnarled fingers, reaching out to snatch at anything that dares cross its path. This place is known as the Hoia-Baciu Forest, and it has earned a reputation for being one of the most haunted and mysterious forest in the world. To those who know its secrets, it's a place of terror, a place where reality bends and time itself seems to warp, like a cruel trick being played on the very fabric of existence. The locals, especially those who live in nearby villages, know better than to venture too close to the forest edge after dark. Some speak of its whispers, careful not to invoke the dark forces that are said to dwell there. They call it the Bermuda Triangle of Romania, a place where people disappear without a trace, and where strange lights dance across the sky. But the truth of what lies within the forest is far darker than any simple tale of ghosts or of supernatural happenings. The forest has a history that goes back centuries, a history that begins with a disappearance. A single shepherd named Baki. One day, he took his flock into the woods and never returned. The year was 1800 and Baki was well known in the area. He was trusted, respected. His flock of 200 sheep followed him into the thick, twisting trees, their bleats echoing as they disappeared into the forest. But Baki, he did not return. Not that day, not the next, and not for weeks. The villagers, of course, searched the forest, calling his name into the eerie stillness. But the forest was vast and the trees were thick. No footprints were found, no trace of him remained. The sheep were scattered, seemingly driven off by something unseen, leaving the forest silent in its wake. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed Baki whole. And then came the lights. Bright, eerie orbs of light, green, blue, red, flickered high above the trees, floating like will-o-wisps in the distance. Some said they were simply reflections, the result of fog in the moonlight. But the locals knew better. These lights didn't belong to nature. They didn't belong to the world of the living. They moved with a grace that was unnatural, as though they had a mind of their own. Some of the more adventurous souls from the villages tried to get closer, eager to understand, to find out what these strange lights really were. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, their fears grew. They saw things, figures, shapes, shadowy movements just out of sight. They heard whispers on the wind, voices calling their names from just beyond the trees. But when they turned around, no one was there. The forest seemed to press in on them, as if the trees themselves were closing rings, trapping them. Some returned, shaken to their core, claiming that the lights weren't the only thing they had seen. They spoke of figures that weren't human, tall, dark shapes moving between the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, shadows that seemed to follow them, no matter how fast they ran. But the most terrifying of all was the woman in white. She was seen by many who dared enter the forest at night, standing at the edge of the trees, her long white gown billowing in the wind. Her face, a twisted mask of pain and anguish, was enough to stop anyone in their tracks. Her eyes, those glowing eyes, pierced through the darkness, and her presence seemed to freeze the very air around her. Some said she was a lost soul, someone who had wandered into the forest long ago and never found her way out. Others believed she was something darker, something that had been waiting for centuries. Those who were foolish enough to approach her reported that she never moved, never spoke. She simply watched, her unblinking eyes following them as they drew closer. And when they turned to leave, when they thought she was gone, they would look back and find her standing closer, always closer, until they could no longer bear the weight of her gaze. Some say that she was the spirit of someone who had disappeared in the forest. Others believe she is a manifestation of the forest itself, a physical embodiment of terror that resides there. But what is certain is that she is not a spirit that rests. She lingers, always waiting, always watching. And then there were the shadows, tall humanoid shapes flickering between the trees. Some say they were the spirits of those who had vanished in the forest over the years, their forms now twisted and malformed by whatever dark forces haunt the woods. Others say they were something older, something more dangerous, creatures that have made their forest their home for as long as anyone can remember. These shadows were not like ordinary ghosts. They were real. People saw them clearly, the dark forms looming just beyond the light of their campfires, slipping between the trunks of trees as if they were one with darkness itself. Those who dared to approach them reported a coldness unlike any other, and a natural chill that seemed to freeze them in place, their breath coming in ragged gasps. It was not just the lights and the shadows that troubled the people of the nearby villages. The forest had a strange power over time itself. People ventured too far into the trees would often return disoriented, unable to account for hours they had lost. They would swear they'd only been in the forest for a few hours, only to find that an entire day had passed. Some even claimed that time itself seemed to stretch or contract while they were inside the forest, that they had been trapped in a moment that felt both eternal and fleeting. One such story tells of a shepherd who entered the forest one afternoon, never to return. His family searched for him for weeks, but it wasn't until many years later that they found him, standing in the same spot where he had vanished. He hadn't aged a day. The world around him changed, the village he knew was gone, and the people he once knew had moved on. Time had lost its grip on him. As the years passed, the village of Hoia itself began to wither. Once a thriving place, it became abandoned, its houses empty, its streets silent. People fled, too terrified to stay, leaving behind the crumbling remnants of their homes. The forest had claimed its due. The village was no longer safe. Hoia-Baciu had become a place of nightmares, a place that no one dared enter. Yet still, the forest stands, silent and watchful, a place where the laws of nature don't apply, where the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. Those who venture in, still to this day, report the same eerie sensations. Unseen eyes upon them, whispers in the wind, and a sense of being watched, even when no one is around. If you find yourself near Hoia-Baciu Forest, standing at its edge, staring into the depths of its dark embrace, know this: some places are not meant to be explored. Some forests are not meant to be entered, because in Hoia-Baciu, the shadows are never far behind, and whatever dwells in the heart of the forest, it doesn't want you to leave. Panaca, Nevada, a place abandoned by time. It wasn't always like this, at least it didn't start this way. The town was once full of life, a mining town with the promise of riches. But as the mines ran dry, so did the town's hope, and as the years passed, it became nothing more than a hollow shell, its streets empty, its homes decaying. But what really pushed the final nail into Panaca's coffin weren't just the failed mines or the economic collapse, no. It was something else, something darker, something that followed those who stayed. In the wilderness surrounding Panaca, there was whispers of creatures. These weren't just stories about coyotes or mountain lions, no. These were stories of huge wolf-like creatures that didn't belong in the Nevada desert. They were too big, too unnatural, eyes that glowed in the dark, figures that moved through the shadows, too fast, too fluid. No one could explain it, but they were there, watching. One night, it all came to a head. A group of hunters ventured into the hills, far from the empty town. They weren't expecting much. It was a typical hunt in the Nevada wilderness, or so they thought. They set up camp in a cool desert night, their fire flickering weakly against the growing darkness. Everything was calm at first, a perfect, eerie stillness, the kind of silence that feels wrong when you're alone. But something was off. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was watching. waiting, and then it started. A growl, low at first, then deeper. A growl so unnatural, it vibrated the very ground beneath their feet. Not a coyote, not a mountain lion, no. It was something else, something larger, more terrifying. It echoed through the hills like the voice of something hungry, something primal. The men froze. They grabbed their rifles, eyes scanning the night. Nothing. Just the growing growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Then came the eyes. They caught the glow of them, cutting through the darkness like a fire in the night. Too big, too bright. There was no mistaking it. Those were not the eyes of any animal they knew. And then out of the shadows, they saw it. A shape, towering, unnatural. The thing moved in a way that no animal should move. Fluid, deliberate, fast. The beast was there, and then it was gone. But the eyes, they never left. Those glowing eyes followed them, haunting them. The men didn't wait to see what happened next. They fled, left their camp behind, left everything behind. No one knows exactly what happened to them, but the camp was abandoned. No blood, no struggle, just the large clawed tracks leading off into the hills. Tracks that were far too big to belong to any wolf. Tracks that seemed to disappear into the very wilderness as if the creature had simply vanished. But it wasn't just those hunters. It never ended there. The stories grew, more reports, more sightings, more people who claimed to have seen the eyes or heard the growls, or even felt the weight of something out there, just watching. No one could explain it, no one could deny it. Wolf-like creatures too large, too monstrous to be anything that should belong in the desert. It wasn't just the sighting of an ordinary predator. This was something ancient, something that didn't belong. There was another man, Earl, a rancher, someone who had lived out in the area for years. Earl had seen things, not once, not twice, but often. At night, he would hear strange sounds near his ranch, sounds that didn't belong to anything he knew. Then, one night, his cattle screamed like nothing he had ever heard before. Earl rushed to his barn. What he saw there, he'll never forget. His cattle had been slaughtered, but not in any way that made sense. There were no bites, no claw marks, nothing that could be explained. Not coyotes, no bear, nothing natural. Just twisted, shredded carcasses. And then he saw them, the tracks. The same enormous paw prints. The same tracks he had heard about in the stories, in the whispers. But that wasn't all. The prints didn't belong to anything that should have walked on four legs. There were no signs that something had been standing upright. Its form was human-like, but not human. Too tall, too twisted, too monstrous. The fear, the tension, it spread. The townsfolk who remained in Panaca grew more and more afraid. It wasn't just the mysterious creature sightings. It was the presence, the feeling of something that never left. It was as if the land itself had turned against them. And so, one by one, they left. The miners, the ranchers, the families, everyone. By the time the early 1900s came around, Panaca had been a ghost town, abandoned, forgotten, left to rot in the desert sun. The town wasn't wiped out by cryptids, but those creatures, those reports of massive, wolf-like beings, those were the last whispers that kept people away. But even after the town had left, the creatures, they stayed. They didn't vanish with the townspeople, no. They lingered in the hills, in the shadows of the desert. They were still there, watching, waiting. The last traces of the town remain. Broken homes, empty streets, and the same eerie stories. But people who dare to pass through the area still report strange sightings. Eyes in the dark, growls that send shivers down your spine. Tracks that seem to belong to something that should not exist. Some say the creatures are skinwalkers, beings twisted by ancient, dark magic. Others say they are something even older. But whatever they are, one thing is for sure, they never left. So, if you find yourself near Panaca, Nevada, stay away from the hills. Don't let the silence fool you. The shadows are never empty, and the eyes, they are always watching.